welcome to another episode of GROWradio. I'm your host, Michelle McIsaac, and you can probably tell that I'm just coming out of the tail end of a cold. My voice is a touch raspy on this intro, but rest assured it sounds perfectly fine in the interview that you're going to be hearing today with my dear friend, Olivia Duffy. Now, I met Olivia through Instagram of all places. I'm not exactly sure when we met on Instagram, but we just sort of hit it off and started connecting around a lot of things that have to do with how we raise our kids and this whole weird and wonderful journey that is parenthood. And what I will say before we get into this interview is that this is a 100% judgment-free zone. Like, there are so many things that we navigate as parents, and we all do things differently. And I would even go to say, I would go so far as to say that Olivia and I's standpoint on a lot of things with regard to parenthood would be considered by society's norms as radical. Um, so, with that said, when we share what works for us, we are in no way trying to shame you for how you're doing things, if you're doing things differently, or if you believe that things should be a certain way. This is 100% a judgment-free zone. There are way too many things for us as parents to navigate in the day-to-day for us to be coming at each other's throats over how we view these things. So while we share our experience and what works for us, this is not a place where we are saying that and also saying that if you've chosen to do things in a different way, that there's anything wrong with that, because we don't believe that that's the case. This is just what works best for us. So we share some of our unique experiences as parents, and we share some of the things that have worked for us. And I think we also try to break down some of the more cultural norms of how we speak to our children specifically, because as we were discussing a handful of different topic options that we had come up with for this episode, we just kept coming back to this idea that the words that we speak to our children become the houses that they live in. And as soon as those words were spoken, we're like, that's it. That's the topic. We've nailed it. And again, this is not an episode designed to shame anyone if they're in a different place. This is more so an open forum where we are really just sitting with and exploring what makes the most sense to us in the place that we're at in our lives right now. And yeah, I would say this is more of a conversation than it is an interview, because Olivia herself has a couple of podcasts as well. So instead of me just interviewing Olivia as I normally would on the show, this is more of us just sitting down and having a conversation about these topics. So I hope you love it. Let's get into this intro. Olivia is a mother, educator, and podcast host with a passion for helping mothers and families, as well as healing on all levels. Becoming a mother shifted Olivia's priorities and career path. With a background in psychology, early childhood education, health coaching, yoga, and birth work, it's safe to say that she's worn a lot of hats throughout her life. Shortly after having her daughter, she realized how much the lack of support impacts mothers, children, and ultimately families. It ignited a passion within her to educate people on the importance of in-person support, attachment, and turning inward to heal childhood wounds. Over the last few years, Olivia has taken a deep dive into what health truly means, how our thoughts can impact our body and overall health, and how we can best support mothers and babies. It all starts at home with you. What you consume on a daily basis, what you read, listen to, eat, and put on your body can positively or negatively impact your health. It's a choice to begin your healing journey, and it's such a beautiful opportunity to learn, grow, and transform. Olivia is hopeful that through her work, she can disrupt the systems within our society that are not serving mothers and families, while also encouraging people to take the first step in their own healing journey, even when it may feel overwhelming. And without further ado, it is my honor and privilege to introduce you to my dear friend, Olivia Duffy.
All right, everyone. Today, I am so excited to introduce you to my friend, Olivia Duffy. She is a pretty cool mama. She has a lot of very interesting stuff to share with you guys today, and I thought she would be a perfect guest to have on the show, especially after I just shared the episode talking about why I stopped sharing my son online. Olivia, why don't you give us the intro? Tell us who you are and what you do, because I know you wear a couple different hats.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be talking to you. I feel like we've talked about it for so long and now we're doing it. So I'm a mom and I don't generally like titles, but mother, I will definitely wear that one. I'm a mom and I have so many different passions, mostly having to do with motherhood and pregnancy and birth and our children and parenting. I'm also super passionate about our overall health and well-being. So whatever we're consuming on a daily basis, the food we're eating, what we're reading, who we're spending our time with, and really just making sure we're focusing on paying attention to all the different aspects of our health.
I think often the thing that has just pulled us together in terms of conversations behind the scenes is all to do with our kids and us as moms, because the motherhood journey is, there's nothing else like it in this world. And there are, I think it just changes us and shapes us in a very unique way. And I feel as though our generation is in this place where we're really considering how we interact with our children, how we engage with our children, and what that is going to do in terms of shaping them as they're older, which is the topic that we wanted to talk about today. Any, I guess, initial thoughts that you want to share on this topic?
Well, I do also want to touch on what you talked about on your last podcast of talking about sharing our kids online, because I do feel like it's all intertwined in terms of how we're treating our kids. It's all part of it, and respecting our children. But I feel like a lot of the time what older generations and even our current generation, not everybody, but a lot of people in our generation don't realize is that the beginning of your child's life is crucial, and it literally impacts everything for them for the rest of their lives. And so I don't know if people get overwhelmed by that, because it's a big undertaking and it's a lot to consider and it can feel overwhelming. But the thing is that how we talk to our children, how we treat our children will not only show them like what they should be accepting within relationships, but also how to treat other people, and then how they're going to be like what types of relationships they're going to be looking for, how they're going to tolerate being spoken to. And it's like the whole treat people the way you want to be treated. I think it can be difficult because we have a lot of generations who have the mindset that children are supposed to be seen and not heard. So you do what I do, you do what I say because I tell you to do so. You do it the second that I ask you. There's no patience, there's no understanding of where they are developmentally based on their age. It's crazy to me because there's things that adults do and like do to children or say to children, but if it was said to them by another adult to them, they would not tolerate it. They would not be okay with it. And people have this idea that children are less than because they're smaller. But what you don't realize is that your words can be a blessing or a curse to your kids. And so we need to be speaking life into them. We need to have them understand that they are loved and cherished for who they are, not just based on their behaviors or what they accomplish.
That was a very deep couple of statements there.
Sorry.
I was like frantically writing because you said some things in there that just completely landed for me. Number one was that how you speak to them shapes their understanding of what they should be accepting. Mm-hmm. So like we don't often think about the way that when a child is in a certain environment, it creates beliefs about who they are, what they're worthy of, what they're capable of who, of what is safe or what they need to do, how they need to act in order to be safe.
Yes.
And then we wonder why our world is so broken today. Mm-hmm. But there's like this ongoing belief system of like, well, they're just kids. We're the adults, we're the boss, we're better than them, we're smarter than them. They don't understand. They just need to sit down and listen. And if they don't, then your kid's going to grow up to be a jerk, or they're going to grow up to walk all over you if you don't. Like there's almost this normalization of treating children a certain way or speaking to them in a way that is completely unacceptable to do to an adult because we think that is turning them into a good person. But like you said, they're little.
Yeah, you and I were going back and forth, like voice messaging on Instagram. And one of my very best friends said to me, she was like, we have to remember that they just got here. Like they literally just got here.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget her saying that, my best friend Carly, because it's so true. And people, it's interesting though, because the mindset of, okay, children don't understand, but then you expect them to understand. The thing is that children are capable of understanding if you take the time and sit with them and talk to them. Obviously, it's gonna vary depending on how old they are, but if you're aware of where they are developmentally and of what the concept is, children do understand, and they are worthy of you sitting down as an adult and sitting and having a conversation with them and leveling with them.
Yeah.
And I feel like it bothers me because not only is telling children to do what you say when you say it, it's blind obedience. It's that, and then it's also the way that you speak to them is going to push them into a mindset of people pleasing. Like, I can't act this way because I won't be loved. I won't be worthy of being loved or liked. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to subscribe to raising children who just blindly go along with what everybody else does. But it's interesting though, because like our generation of, like how I was raised, at least, they were like, if everybody's running and jumping off a bridge, like, are you going to do the same thing? But it's the way that they raised us is like the opposite of that. So
that's true.
It's a little confusing.
It's like we're raising children in this world and expecting blind obedience. And we think that's going to turn them into a free thinker. We think that's going to where that's going to teach them autonomy is when we take all their autonomy when they're young.
Exactly.
Castor oil packs have stood the test of time for centuries and for good reason. The first time I had heard of them, it was actually from my naturopathic doctor. She told me it could really help in supporting my liver, which has over 560 functions in the body. No biggie. And that it could also help in reducing inflammation, boosting my resilience, and helping me to break down biofilm. When I looked up all the steps on how to do a castor oil pack online, it said I had to take a sheet of flannel, cover it with castor oil, hold it over my liver, cover that with plastic wrap, apply heat, and essentially don't move for a few hours. It also said that for best results, I'd want to make this a consistent everyday practice. Now, not only do I not have that kind of time, but that creates a lot of mess and a lot of waste. Soon after this, I discovered the Queen of the Thrones castor oil pack, and I loved it so much I actually interviewed Dr. Marisol Tejero herself, the creator of this awesome product, on episode 8 of the podcast. Her packs are far less messy. They have ties, so you can actually wear the pack while you're sleeping at night, and you do not need to add heat. So it's like this life-changing, centuries-old practice that's been completely remade for modern-day beings. But hold up, because not all castor oil is created equal either. When we apply this oil, which has the capacity to make it through the skin, we want to ensure we're using an organic, cold-pressed, hexane-free castor oil that's bottled in amber glass. And yes, you can get the pack itself and the Queen of the Thrones castor oil together in a perfectly convenient kit. So, are you ready to rule your health and own your throne? Then head over to michellemckissick.com/blog/castor oil to learn more. Today, I'm answering a question that I get in my inbox at least a few times a week, which is, where did I go to school and what did I think about it? I became a registered holistic nutrition practitioner through Nutriforia's School of Holistic Nutrition, and I actually did my entire program online from home with a full-time job and a new baby. And honestly, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I love that it was all delivered online and that I could do it at my own pace because I actually managed to complete my entire 2-year program in about 13 months. They also have a 1-year holistic nutrition and health coach certification, but I decided to go for the 2-year advanced diploma in holistic nutrition, and I loved every bit of it. I cannot recommend this program enough. And with me being a military spouse at the time, it was also really important that the programs be internationally recognized so that I could use my certification from anywhere in the world. So if you require the ability to study at your own pace in your own time and holistic nutrition sounds like your jam, head over to michellemckizik.com/blog/Nutrophoria to learn all about Nutrophoria's course and program offerings.
And I remember talking to someone about that once, and they were kind of asking about my parenting style because I very much sit and talk on my son's level with him a lot. And they're like, well, why do you do that? And I'm like, well, because I'm someone who values autonomy. And that they're like, so you just let him walk all over you then? Like he's just going to grow up and be a brat. He's going to be obnoxious and loud and walk all over everybody. And I'm like, no, he's going to grow up trusting himself. He's going to grow up knowing that it's okay for him to think about things and make his own decisions. It's not like when we say autonomy for a child, it doesn't mean that we go and send them off the bridge. Right. When we're encouraging, an open dialogue with our kids.
I was going to say, I agree with you. And there's a lot of people who, same thing, like my family members questioning me about the way that I'm raising my daughter. And that's fine. I mean, it's different than what their generations did. I do, to a degree, think that there is a level of like passive parenting that is very alive and well, where people are letting their children like walk all over them, not actually talking to them about, hey, no, like there are things we do need to listen to. We do need to be respectful of one another. We do need to, the same thing, like we're teaching our kids that the way that we speak to them is important. And they have to have that mutual respect back. And obviously it takes time, and there's going to be things that come up at every stage of their childhood and throughout their life. So I think that sometimes people think that it's just like super passive because you're caring about your children's thoughts and feelings and emotions, when in reality you're like, no, I'm trying to help them become emotionally mature so that we can always have this trust in our relationship, where my child can come to me, even if if there's something going on and they want to talk about something, but they don't know how to do it, they're going to feel safe to come to me because I've constantly provided that safe space over and over and over and over again, no matter what the situation is. Or if I haven't done that, then I've gone back and I've done the repair of being like, hey, I'm sorry, the way that I talked to you was disrespectful and it was based on my own feelings.
Yes. Yeah, you bring up such a good point, because a lot of the time I think that's the misconception, is that by treating your child like they're a human who can listen and have opinions and things like that, like it's like a lot of people assume that means that you're a passive parent, when I think in reality the opposite is true. It's not, there is such a thing as, I think, passive parenting, but what we're talking about here is actually very active parenting. And in fact, it requires more patience from us, and it requires more, I would say, emotional intelligence to be able to hold that space, because sometimes it would just be easier to say, nope, just go, just do this, and one of the things I love that you just said is you mentioned apologizing to our kids. There is such a stigma around this idea. Like, why can we as adults not humble ourselves and apologize? And a quote that I heard once that stuck with me was that children who are apologized to learn how to apologize. Yes. And that has always stuck with me as a mom.
It's so true. I mean, if you reflect back on like anything in your life, right? Like whether it was an argument with your parents or with your siblings or a friend or anything like that. A lot of the time, what people don't realize is that the argument itself, like people will remember that, the child will remember that and it will impact them. However, if you go in and repair at literally any point in their life, it could be 20 years down the line. And you could say, hey, I've been thinking about this or whatever, and I've realized that I was wrong in that situation and I treated you unkindly and I'm sorry. Like that in itself can change the entire trajectory of a relationship. And so if we can learn like you said, if we can humble ourselves and do that now, like as our children are growing, it changes the whole game. And this is not taking a shot at my parents, but I genuinely do not remember my parents ever apologizing to me. Like I just I don't I don't have any memory of that. And so I think the fact that we're aware of, hey, we're human, we mess up is important. And also too, it takes like emotional maturity to be like, okay, I'm this age and I'm human and I mess up. I'm not perfect. I'm never going to be perfect. Like showing our children that humility that we are able to mess up and we can apologize. Because if we're not apologizing to them, and it's also kind of setting them up for this mindset of like a perfectionism. Like I can't ever do anything wrong, or I'm not going to apologize even if I know I'm wrong. So it's a back and forth type of thing.
Yeah. And it all, I think, feeds into as adults, the concept of inner child work, which is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the voice. It's like the inner parent in us is punishing the inner child. The inner child is like revolting and upset and frustrated, and their needs are not being met as adults. And then we wonder where that's coming from. And is it because that child had a need that was not met when they were young? And so like looking at how this transfers on a generational scale, and the same thing with me is like looking at what sort of patterns I'm breaking for my son's future as an adult, and how he's going to be able to navigate this world that's forever changing, because we can't predict what the world's going to look like. We can only prepare them for the unpredictable.
Yeah. And I think too that like our kids, they have to understand to a degree. Like we can level with them being like, I was raised or parented this way and I didn't like it. And so if I'm showing up in that way, in the way that I'm parenting you, like I'm sorry for that. I'm still unlearning that. The other thing too is that I know we talked about initially, this can be like, it's a big undertaking. It can feel overwhelming. And the thing is that we can be very, very connected with our children and working on ourselves. We're still going to mess up. We are going to hurt them unintentionally, and that has to be something that we accept. We can't break every single parenting like generational thing, just us. But if we're aware of that, we're here and we're trying, that's I think that matters a lot to obviously ourselves, but to our kids as well.
Yeah, there is no such thing as perfection as
No.
parents ever.
We don't I don't even
Ever.
we don't use the word perfect in my house. I'm like, that's not real.
But I think humbling ourselves and being willing to say that we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to get this perfect. We're going to do the best we can because this matters to us and our kids matter to us. But knowing that it's going to be flawed, and that at the end of the day, I think our kids chose us as their parents when they came here. That's my personal thought on that.
Yeah.
And they chose us to teach them something. And some of it will feel good and some of it won't feel good.
Yeah.
But I think just having the humility to sit down and say, I'm probably going to mess this up.
Yeah.
But I'm going to do the best that I can. I think that's the most that our kids can ask of us.
Yeah. Well, I think that in the way that you were talking about like our inner voice, it's so true. And that inner voice sticks with you your whole life. There's still times where in my head I'm saying something and I'm like, Olivia, what are you doing? But it's like so deeply ingrained from your childhood that it's like we have this opportunity as parents to shift that with our kids, and that's huge. And at the same time, I don't think that there's ever a way that we can explain to our kids just how much of a profound impact they've had on us. I'm getting emotional just like saying it, because like I just don't think our kids realize that like they come in and they literally change like everything. And in so many ways, like I say it openly. I'm like, my daughter literally saved me, like wholeheartedly. Like I don't even know. I look back at pictures of myself and I'm like, who is that? Who is that person? Because when, like you said in the beginning, when you become a mom, motherhood is like the biggest emotional roller coaster, and it's also the most profound transformational like journey of your entire life.
Yeah.
And so the fact that like our kids have provided us with this opportunity to learn and grow, and we get to do that with them as they grow up, it's the biggest blessing. And I really think that sometimes that gets taken for granted in the day-to-day life and everything that we have to get done. And it's so important to like really sit back and realize that.
Oh yeah, we think we know what we're getting ourselves into. And then we have a little human that's passed to us and we're just like, "Oh, hello.
Oh,
You are here to teach me some things there, little one."
yep.
And they're for sure our mirrors. Every
Oh
time that
yeah.
like cuz you will be triggered. We like this is not saying it's easy. There's going to be times where you feel triggered. There are going to be times where your own core wounds come up, and I
Yeah.
think one of the things that I've heard too that really always stuck with me was this idea that when we think that our kids need to suffer, whether it be emotionally or physically, in order to learn a lesson, in order to get out of that mindset, the first thing we need to do is embrace the idea that we didn't deserve to suffer physically or emotionally in order to learn.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't need to have that happen in order to grow into the people that we are today.
Yeah.
And that's a big mirror. Like when you start looking at it that way, I think that changes a lot. Would you like to share a little bit about your parenting journey? Because how many kids do you have?
I have one daughter.
One daughter. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that like for you when you first became a mom and started to engage with her? Like, is this kind of topic of how you interacted with her, did it come naturally for you, or what sort of struggles did you have with that?
Well, I've worked with kids my whole life, like literally since I was, I think 13 is when I started like really working with kids and young kids. But I've always known I wanted to be a mom. It was like one of the most important things to me because I just loved kids so much. And it was really interesting seeing all of the different like families that I worked with and like their parenting style versus like how I was raised and like my grandparents and all of these things. And so in my mind, I had like this concept of I thought I knew exactly how I was going to raise her. And like you said, then they come in and everything changes. There were a lot of things that are just like the norm in our society that I actually went completely against and never thought that I necessarily would because it was not done in my family. Like, for example, I have co-slept with my daughter since she was tiny, like
Yeah.
literally tiny. And it ended up being just so much easier. Like I got more sleep, she got more sleep. Everything was different, but then like everybody else is like, "Oh, you sleep with your child? Like they sleep in the same bed as you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." It works out that way. That and then like breastfeeding and then as she got older just paying attention to like her emotions and her needs. And I think too like there's just like almost like this lack of respect for babies and young kids. I mean, we've already kind of touched on it, but if your child is uncomfortable or like scared of something, like not forcing them to go do that. Like my daughter wanted to be with me majority of the time because I was with her all the time. So if there was someone who we didn't see very often who wanted to hold her or that type of thing, if she wasn't comfortable with it, I just took her back. Like I was like, "No, she's clearly not comfortable. I'm not going to have her sit here screaming and crying when she doesn't want to be held by you when I'm right here. That makes no sense."
Yeah.
And obviously, like there's a difference between like your child never seeing anybody else and never interacting with anybody. But I feel like a lot of the time that was viewed as like weird, that I was like respecting what my daughter was clearly trying to communicate before she had words. I think there's a lot of generational things that I've noticed with how I raise her, like the concept of saying sorry when they're really young and they don't even understand what that actually means.
Yeah.
Or if they're taking something from somebody, like another child, or hitting someone, or all of these things, like there's so many layers to it that people just don't even consider. They say, "Oh, like they're behaving badly, so I'm going to go over there and I'm going to force them to say sorry." But it's
Yeah.
like, okay, why are they acting that way though? Do you have any idea why they're acting that way? What's behind that? how did they sleep that night? When was the last time they ate? Are they tired? Are they frustrated? Like there's so many things that people literally just don't even consider. And it's wild to me. It's really wild to me that people just immediately like, oh, they're just a bad kid. They're just, they just want your attention. And it's like, actually, yeah, they're looking for connection with you. Because a lot of the time when a child acts out, there is an unmet need that they have. And sometimes when they're younger, they have no idea how to communicate that. So it's up to us as parents to like sit with them and give them words and help them understand those words, those feelings, those emotions. So when they do come up, they can say, "Hey, I'm feeling frustrated," or "I'm feeling upset that you said that to me," or that we didn't get to do this or that. And I mean, it's obviously it's different with it changes all the time, every 6 months, every year as they get older. I feel like you constantly have to just be tweaking what you do while you're parenting.
Yeah, I mean, it all points to like, first of all, okay, I love that you talked about co-sleeping and all of these different, because I think moms, it doesn't matter what you do. Like
Yeah.
if you co-sleep, if you cry it out, if you bed share, if you whatever, somebody's gonna hate you for it.
Yeah.
I co-slept with my son until he was 8 months old, and it was the best thing ever. I personally loved it. I focus on my own four walls. I never pass judgment to another parent who's doing things differently. But the reason that I loved it, this is kind of a side note, is because I didn't plan on doing it. And for the first month, I didn't. I was getting up, I was exhausted. I was like, oh man, I am going to be just a tired mess for so long. And then one night I got up and I was nursing my son, and then we fell asleep laying down, and we slept for like 8 hours, and I woke up refreshed, and he was all snuggled in my arm, and I was like, there's something to this. Like I got to do some research. And I started researching co-sleeping, and it blew my mind to see that, like, obviously there are nuances to it. Like you have to be of sober mind to co-sleep, I would say, because that's when there can be issues. But a mother who co-sleeps has like this, I don't know how much you've read, and you probably know way more than I do, but like there is like a hormonal connection where if that baby is not okay, you will wake up, you will feel it, you will notice it. Like there's all these stories of like, oh, you can't co-sleep because what if the baby falls in the crack of the bed? And like none of that happened for us. I was so aware all the time, but I also was very rested. And like the nice thing is, if the baby wakes up and they're hungry, you don't have to wake up. The baby will just wake up and feed themselves and then go back to sleep. So I was like, I was the most well-rested parent of an 8-month-old ever after that. Like we figured it out, and it clicked. And I was like, that was one thing from that first year that was such a blessing to figure out. And looking back, like I remember thinking, okay, there's going to come a time when he's old enough and he switches to his crib. And for us, that was 8 months old is when he switched. And it was just one day I'm like, let's try it. Put him in there, and it was like with ease. I was worried it was going to be a whole thing and it was going to be a disaster, but we did it once and he was fine with it, and we just transitioned very easily. But I remember him being 2 months old and 3 months old, and me thinking like, yeah, okay, I could go put him in a crib, but like I'm never going to get this time with my son back again. And the snuggles and like the little fuzzy hairs on his head, and like it's just like it was bliss is what it was.
It is.
And I loved it. So I love that you talked about how that's going against the norm, because like I don't judge another parent's style of doing things in that regard. But I will talk about how much I loved co-sleeping from my own perspective. Any day of the week, it was one of the best decisions we ever made. So total side note, but I had to talk about co-sleeping because I got all the slack about it. Your baby's gonna get squished. You're gonna roll over them. You're gonna lose them off the side of the bed. It's dangerous. It's deadly. It's this and that. But none of that is true. And it didn't make my child clingy. Like a lot of people said, oh, well, it's going to shape them into this like really needy, clingy person when they're older. I'm like, none of that happened. If anything, he is, I think, more able to, I don't know how to put it, but like he's okay on his own now because he had that sense of security. And I don't know if I feel like that has a big piece to it.
Yeah. Well, there's in our society in the US at least, there's like this push for independence before kids are even ready for it. And I think a lot of the time it actually backfires. Like if you're pushing however old your child is, whether they're an infant, first year of their life, first few years of their life, if you're pushing and pushing and pushing them to be independent before they're ready to, like it can completely backfire and it can make them feel more cautious and not want to do these things and not want to venture out on their own. But if you have a cycle where like they know they can come back to you and like constantly come back to you, then that allows them to feel like more freedom, like I know that my mom is going to be there because she checks in on me, because she responds to me type of thing. And like our kids need that. They need to have that safety within the relationship between mother and child and father and child.
And you brought up a really good point too, Olivia, talking about like if your daughter wanted to go, or if somebody wanted to hold your daughter and then you could tell by her visual cues that she was not into it, and you doing that and saying like, I don't think she wants that. Like, to me, that is all about you being a safe place for her. You're being a grounding point. You're being her comfort. She knows that you're listening and not just saying, oh, nope, the grownups, like, this is what they want. And so you should just go and do what they want. Like, she's a person too. And even though she's a little person, that doesn't take away her ability to be afraid of someone, or maybe not be ready to be held by them, or maybe have a little stranger danger because she doesn't know if they're safe. And it's not you saying, okay, well, I'm going to take her back because this person is bad. It's you saying, nope, she's just not ready right now. It's okay.
Yeah, she's not comfortable. And I think that, I mean, ties into as they get older too, like you're showing them, I'm not going to go force you to do something with your body that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
That's been one of the bigger things, because I do think culturally, a lot of cultures like hug and kiss and like all of those things. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if a child is very clearly not comfortable with someone, being like, oh no, you need to go hug them goodbye, you need to go kiss them goodbye. Like, no, you can still teach your child, you can do what you feel comfortable with. We can use our manners and say bye and say thank you for having us and that type of thing, but not forcing them to go do something that they very clearly don't want to do was really interesting, like within my family, because like there's the older generation who's like, oh, so and so is going to be sad if you don't give them a hug. And I'm like, no, we're not we're not doing that, because she's not responsible for your feelings, you are. So but a lot of people who don't have like that mindset, that thought process, it's not something they even consider.
Respect is not blind obedience.
Yeah.
Respect is holding space for everyone involved, including your children. I'm kind of going against the grain here, but I feel like this is an important question, because when we talk about this way that we speak to our children, one of the big areas is around conflict. Like, let's say your child is biting someone or they're doing some kind of behavior. And like, I look at those times as an opportunity to teach problem solving. Like, instead of it being a punishment, and that is like an opportunity to revoke your love for them, which I think is how punishment can be. Like, oh, I'm going to take your things. If you don't behave, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to take your toys. I'm going to lock you in your room. It can be actually a beautiful opportunity to develop this person into a critical thinker who can do it without you. Because really, I think at the end of the day, we're raising our kids in a way where they can be in this world and feel secure enough that they don't need us.
Right.
Does that make sense? What are your thoughts on like specifically around conflict resolution and problem solving when it comes to this?
Well, I think it's definitely been challenging. I did want to mention something that you said earlier when you were talking about it would just be easier for us to be like, no, you do what I say, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. I'm going to whatever when it comes to parenting. Obviously, it would be easier. But a lot of people don't realize that like when you're actually trying to be in tune with your child and like in tune with how they're feeling, in tune with why you're feeling triggered in the first place, like that takes more work. And people don't necessarily always want to do that work. But so for when it comes to like problem solving and conflict resolution with my daughter, there were certain things that I have noticed time and like not constantly, but certain things come up sometimes when I'm feeling triggered or I'm feeling upset. And there were certain ways that I realized that I was reacting in a way that I was the same way I was parented, and I didn't want to do that. And so, especially when it came to like one of the biggest things that has been triggering for me is like when your kid just straight up ignores you. Like straight up ignores you. And I mean, there's so many reasons that that can trigger somebody, but as a parent, when you're trying to get ready to go, or you have to leave at a certain time, or you have to move on to the next thing, sitting and leveling with your child and being like, hey, listen, I know that you're having so much fun doing this, and just trying to help them feel acknowledged and understood, and help their feelings feel that way too. Like help them understand that you know how they're feeling, or that you have gone through something similar, makes a really big difference. And so also just asking them questions about if there was a situation, for example, where my daughter hit another child, or she took something away from another child, and that child is very clearly visibly upset, or they react in a way and she's confused as to why they reacted that way, pulling them, like taking them apart separately and being like, why do you think that they're acting this way? Why do you think that they're feeling this way? Would you like it if someone has done that to you? But the difficult part about it is that like every single one of us as human beings, we all have things that will trigger us or not trigger us. And like something that would trigger me might not trigger you. And the same thing with another child, with two children, I should say. Also, children are so quick to forgive, to like have a conversation and forgive and move on. Whereas a lot of adults are not like that. So if we're giving our child the opportunity to try and understand how another child is feeling, and giving them like the words for it, and like the context for it, and not just saying, oh, you have to go say sorry, being like, oh, you can go check in with them and say, how can I help you fix it? Or you can't obviously say sorry also, but I feel like there's things that come before that. How can I help you fix it? Why are you feeling this way? Was there something that I did that upset you? And again, obviously this depends on how old they are and their general development and understanding, but there's always the opportunity to provide our kids with words to help them understand things.
I think we often forget that their brains aren't fully developed.
Yes.
And that in the process of their brain developing, what is the one thing that kids are really good at? They're really good at copying and mimicking the behavior. Like lots of creatures in the world do this, but our kids, like, do you ever see that video of the little boy that's like, he's talking like his mom and he's like, listen, Linda, listen, honey. And you can tell he's like copying his mom. Like our kids are going to mimic our behavior to some extent. And like you said in the beginning, it's kind of like this idea of when you level with your kids, it can be viewed as passively parenting or just letting them get away with anything. But the reality is, if we want our children to grow up and be able to, as adults, regulate their emotions, which I think is becoming more and more rare in our world. I could be wrong on that, but I feel as though it's becoming a rarity because there's so much distraction and, like everything is just dopamine, everything. Yeah. But I feel like if we want our children to be able to regulate their emotions, we have to be able to show them that we can stay calm in their chaos, in any chaos. Yes. If we want them to be people, we want to raise them up to be adults who can show empathy for others, we have to be willing to show empathy for them. If we're telling them you have to have empathy and we're cutting off empathy to them and saying, just be quiet and do as I say. Yeah. Are they going to just quote, be good, whatever being good means? Or are they going to learn how to truly connect with the idea of what empathy really is and why it is so important? It's like behaving in the way we want our children to behave. It's like it's starting with us. Yes.
And like you said earlier, like they literally are our mirrors. They watch every single thing they do. They listen to everything that we say. Even if you think they're not listening, they're listening. And so if we're trying to tell our children that they have to be a certain way or act a certain way, but we're not acting that way as adults, not just with them, just with anybody in general, how we approach situations, how we work through our own feelings. They ultimately are going to copy what we do. And we can't just yell at a child and expect them to act how we can't yell at them and say, you should be acting this way, you should be doing this while you're yelling at them, because that's incredibly confusing.
Yeah.
So, and children, honestly, children learn through play so much more, so much faster. And so, again, we have the opportunity to be modeling this for them at all times. And then the times where we mess up, just say it. Just be honest. Hey, I reacted this way to this situation. I shouldn't have reacted this way. And I'm going to do some work on myself and work through my feelings so I don't do that again.
Oh, yeah. It is like, it totally shows us where our own struggles with regard to emotional safety and security are.
Yeah.
And I think we have those feelings a lot because of, I'm not going to say because of how we were brought up, but because we somewhere along the line formed beliefs not about how to self-regulate, but more how to suppress what was really going on. And that's if you go into inner child work, it's a lot of it is about specifically that, like what need was not met for you that you just had to suppress and endure. Yeah, it is so amazing how this work transfers generationally. And I think, we can never get it perfect. It's always going to be, there are going to be ups and downs in it, but the ability to look at your child and say, I messed up, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, what I said was wrong, I'm sorry, is going to teach them so much more than just like hoping they forget that maybe you were out of line.
I think like what you said earlier about like, you're not sure if there are many adults who know how to regulate their emotions. I really genuinely think it's so tied into how our generations and past generations were raised, right? Is because our kids are taught they're to be seen and not heard, or like man up type of thing. So what I think we're seeing now is a result of that. We have people who've been generationally raised the same way and like keep all their feelings inside, bottle them all up because they're told that they can't express them. Like, so if a child's screaming and crying because they're upset, like it's better for them to get that out than to keep it inside, because if they keep it inside, it's going to come out at some point. And if that child keeps it inside for years and years and years and years, all the way through adulthood, there's going to be so many things that are going on inside that are going to be, it's basically like hurt people. They really do. Like your problems and the stuff that you have going on, like you're going to end up bleeding on other people. You're going to end up causing a rainstorm on people who have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And so it's crucial that we teach our children like, hey, we're going to talk about how you're feeling. You're going to get all your feelings out. We can process it however you need to process it. And we're going to move on. Yeah. Because if not, I mean, we see adults now who are literally acting like toddlers.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm feeling frustrated about X, Y, and Z. I'm going to go break all this stuff. I'm going to go, I'm going to go scream and yell at somebody who has nothing to do with how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And it's wild to me that more people can't see that. Like people will be like, oh, I was raised this way and I'm fine. I'm like, oh, are you though? Because what I'm seeing isn't showing that I think that you're fine.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
There are definitely struggles, I think, to hold space for differing opinions and beliefs in our world today.
Yeah.
Like if you don't think how I think, canceled, goodbye. Like,
oh my gosh. Yes.
Which is a huge thing. But before we go, I do want to ask you one more question, because I think this is important. It's kind of like, I would say, a side topic. Okay. Because one of the things that you and I both have in common is that we have either been divorced or separated.
Yeah.
And that's may not be the topic of this episode, but on kind of a side note, I think it's important to touch on the relationships that we have around our kids, because it's one thing to talk about how we speak to our children, but it's also about the relationships that they see around them as they grow up.
Yes.
And I think like one of the things we talked about before this episode was the idea that the relationships they see create what they think should be accepted.
Right.
And they create an idea of what love looks like.
Right.
And I would love for you to expand on this as someone who has gone through a separation as a mom, because I too have gone through it. And it is not always easy to go through those things with kids around.
Yeah. So my parents are divorced also. And I went into getting married literally never wanting to get a divorce. I just didn't. And in hindsight, looking back, there were so many different things that like I just didn't know before getting married. But one of the things that I had always promised myself since separating from my daughter's dad and getting divorced was just that I was never going to speak negatively about him in front of her, and never react in a crazy way in front of, like, have her see me reacting in a wild way to him in any manner.
Yeah.
Because that happened with me growing up and it impacted my relationships with my mom and my dad. And so no matter what is or was going on with her dad and I have always just remained calm and civil. And I think it's important that she sees that. And even now, she's 4 now, we have birthday parties for her and her dad is always more than welcome to be there. And that's important to me that she sees that even though we may not agree on certain things or we may have different views and we ended up separating, we can still be in the same environment together and we both love her, and she needs to see that. And I think that there were certain things that within our marriage when I was married that I just realized that I just wasn't okay with. And I wasn't okay with her being raised to see that. And so I'm not going to go into details or anything like that. But when you become a mom, I think so much of your mindset shifts and you realize how you were acting, like your people pleasing tendencies or whatever it was, or not pretending, but just like unintentionally being someone who you actually aren't to like make people love you or like you. That stuff starts to show up, and then you can have conversations about it. But ultimately, I think that if someone is not willing to level with you, like in a relationship within a marriage, and agree to grow individually and grow together, then it's not going to work. And this is not advocating for divorce in any way. Like obviously, things could have been different, but they're just not. But I do think that making sure that our kids see that we can be civil is crucial for them, because I don't want her to think she can treat him a certain way because I did, and vice versa. So it's a layered conversation, but yeah, I think, did I answer it, like all your questions about that? I'm trying to think if
Definitely.
I fully answered that question. Okay.
I think that you have a unique perspective on it because you not only went through it with your former partner, but you also were raised in a home where divorce happened there too. So you see it from the role of the mother and of the child, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that those two experiences were the same by any stretch, it was two completely different things, but you can see how it shapes you as a child and as a partner, as a former partner. And my thought, what I'm curious about as a child who went through it, because my parents are still married, but I went through a divorce, is, do you feel like as a child who went through that, and I know you said with your parents when they got divorced, it was like some of those things, like they talked in front of you and stuff. Do you feel like that affected your concept of self? Because you came from these two people. You were born, like they're your parents. They're, as a child, the two most important people in your world.
Yeah.
Did that change how you viewed yourself? And the reason I ask this as a preface is because I watched something from Dr. Kelly Brogan about this topic of like when parents split up, how that affects the child's view of themselves depending on how the parents interact in front of the child. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I
It's a
get what you're
really
saying.
interesting conversation.
I get what you're saying. I guess I haven't really thought about it from that perspective, because I know that a lot of the time there are situations where kids blame themselves for their parents getting divorced. However, I don't know. I feel like, so I was 6 when my parents got divorced, and I feel like it wasn't even like talked about, which is the whole concept of divorce. When you're 6 years old, you're not like understanding that and understanding the layers behind why your parents are getting divorced. I mean, it's not necessarily something you need to know, but I feel like it wasn't even discussed with us really. Um, but it is interesting. And but looking back though, so like I was saying, I'm not someone who advocates for divorce. However, there are situations where I do think that people being separated is honestly what's better for the entire family. Because for me, like I look back and I'm like, I don't even know what it would have looked like if my parents stayed together. Like it could have been worse, you know? Like there are so many people in this world who they stay together for the kids. But is that actually what's best for everybody? If mom's unhappy, dad's unhappy, then obviously that's going to impact the kids. So it's both. Like I have very good friends whose parents are still together, but they don't even like each other. And so
Yeah.
so growing up in that household, like you see you see two different aspects. Like I grew up in two households, and I have a friend who grew up with her parents and they don't like each other. And so it's like I'm not one who advocates for divorce in any way, because I do think that there are ways that people can come together and really like mend things, but it has to be both people wanting to do that.
Yeah.
But in terms of how I see myself, I don't know. I
It's a
think
deep
like
question, right?
it is, because I know that there are definitely a lot of things that I've realized that have come up for me in relationships in terms of like how I am in a relationship, like what that void. I actually meant to say this earlier. So oftentimes what we don't realize is that as we get older, based on what we see growing up and based on like if our needs are met, we will have like a void that we're looking for someone else to fill. When in reality, it's never like that's not going to be it's not going to be filled by them. It can't be. And so I feel like we kind of have this expectation of, oh, this person's going to come in and I'm going to be with them and everything's going to be fine. And that's not real life. Like it takes the inner work and really sitting with yourself to work on that. And sometimes honestly, like that might always be there.
Yeah, and sometimes I think with divorce and with parents separating, with children involved, the best way to look at it is together or apart, there's healing opportunities.
Yeah.
That's what you're given, right? If they stay together, there's some opportunity for healing to happen in that family. If they are apart, there's some opportunity for healing. But yeah, it is interesting to think about like how does that breaking apart of the two people that came together to make you,
Yeah.
how does that affect us on a psyche level?
Yeah.
And Kelly Brogan talked about it on some video. I forget where I saw it, but I was like, oh man, that's really interesting. Because at the time, my husband and I had been separated for maybe 6 months. So it was still very, very fresh.
Yeah.
And I'm of the same perspective as you, is like, we're always speaking highly of dad here.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, it's always going to be about my son and his well-being. At the end of the day, you know, you can have breakups and there can be hurt feelings and things can go whatever way, positive, negative. But at the end of the day, my son didn't choose any of that.
Yeah.
He came here. He has enacted us as his mom and dad. And my only goal is to try to be the best mom that I can be. I know I'm going to make mistakes. I know I'm not going to get it right. And I know that, you know, his parents aren't together. And in fact, I'm not only doing the whole co-parenting thing, but I'm doing a long distance co-parenting thing. My son's dad actually lives like several hours away, which creates this like further level of complexity for us. But at the end of the day, dad is always spoken of highly in our home because he will always be a part of my son's life. Yeah. And I want that. I want them to have that really strong, healthy relationship, even if it's not under the same roof as us all the time.
Yes.
And I think that that is the most that we can do to try to create a opportunity for our children to heal when those things happen and when their world changes.
Yeah.
But I want to just take a moment and thank you so much for just coming on and chit-chatting about these things. We're like, when we started talking about doing a podcast episode, we genuinely were just like, let's just have a conversation about it. Let's just come on and just talk about it, because we both have this very unique perspective, I think, on the whole parenting topic. And I really value your stance on these things and just the compassion that you show for all parents, all mothers who, just like us, are just figuring it out as we go, and we're doing the best we can. So thank you so much for coming on the show today. Tell us where everybody can find you and connect with you, and also learn about your podcast.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really have loved just sitting and chatting. It's always nice when you can just chat and it's just a free flowing conversation. It's really nice. So thank you. So I'm on Instagram at Healing in Motherhood, and that's where it's probably like the easiest place you can find me. But if you want to email me, it's healinginmotherhood@gmail.com. And then I have 2 podcasts, one that's just my podcast, and then I have another podcast that I do with my best friend. I can send you the info for those 2.
All right, we'll throw them in the show notes then.
Yay.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We'll have to get you back on. Maybe we can get your podcast partner in crime to come on and chat with us too.
Oh, sometime. Yeah. That'd be fun.
The 3 of us just riffing off on all the things. Thanks for being on the show, and it was great.
Thank you.